Good morning, everyone. So in the last class, we are trying to discuss with the method related information. So how we can define this particular method. So to define this particular method, what are the syntax we need to follow? We identified here. And later, we try to provide the parameter, like the return value of this particular method. So we handle here. Fine. So in the after this particular return value and declaring the method, so we identified how exactly the methods are going to take parameters here. So to take these particular parameters, first, why we need to provide the parameters here. So if we are not providing the parameters, what are there? So drawbacks we are going to get here. Getting the point. So simple example we need to understand first here. Basically, if I'm going to work with this particular square method, if I'm not providing any parameters here. So in the last class we identified. So every time which is going to return the same value is nothing but the constant value we are going to get for it. How many times we are going to call this particular square method, right? So instead of getting the constant value, what we need to do based on our requirement. So requirement is nothing but based on the particular input value. So we want to get this particular expected output here. The dynamic output we are going to get here whenever we are trying to provide the particular dynamic input here. So how exactly we are going to achieve here based on this particular method parameters here. Getting the point. So in the last class we provided the two parameters here. So whenever we are trying to provide this particular method parameters, we need to provide the data type first here. So what kind of the data type we need to provide, and whenever we are trying to specifying this particular data type here, the same data type values we are going to provide here. The same data type values we are going to provide here, right? So before creating this particular method, then only we need to understand here. So what is the purpose of this particular method? And this particular method is trying to return any value. And if it is trying to return value, like what are the parameters this particular method is going to expecting, getting the point. So these are the things we need to understand before creating the method. The simple we understand here in the example we created the square method. The square method which is expecting to take the two parameters here. So what are the two parameters which is expecting here? The two parameters int I into j. Into I into j here. Right. So the return type here, the return type also we are expecting here. So whenever we are trying to expecting this particular return type here, so we need to provide the return type here. So what is a return type? Return type is nothing but which data type we are trying to return here. So this is also very important here. Now for this simple example here, we are providing the into data type, and the same way we are trying to return the same data type here. But sometimes what happens here, so we are expecting the different data type, and we are going to return the different data type here. Getting the point. So this is the method behavior we need to understand carefully, because in the real-time application we are going to create more than one interface, more than one method here. Right, based on our requirement we are going to create more, and here the name of the method also we need to provide the understandable view. So by seeing the particular method, we need to understand so which purpose the method is implemented here. Getting the point. So this is the way we need to define here. So now we identified here this particular value method. What is the purpose of this particular method we defined here? So to return the volume of this particular box here. To return the volume of this particular box we provided here. Same way, whatever this particular square here. So to find out the square of this particular into two values here. Right. So this is the way we need to understand the particular each method purpose here. Now, okay. So we identify the simple example here. But now what I want to do, so okay. Where we created our main class, I think here. Okay. Now, if I'm going to call this particular square method, now you can see, so we are giving the different data type, different value here. We are trying to provide the different values here. So whenever we are trying to provide the different values, we are going to get the expected output also differently, right? So it's nothing but, so instead of getting the same, like it's nothing but a constant value, what we are doing is we are trying to get the dynamic value here. So we're trying to getting the dynamic value. Now we identify this particular square method. The same way we are going to provide the method inside this particular box class. Getting the point. Because we are trying to work with the box class here, we need to understand here how exactly we can work on this particular box. So simple understand here. Let me create like a, it is all the remaining one. Now you can see we are having the box class. So in the box class we created this pair here, and now I want to create a one more method which is going to take parameters of this particular variable here. So which is going to take parameters of this particular method here. Now observe, so I'm not returning anything from this particular method. If you are not returning anything here, what we can do? Simply we need to provide the void here. So we need to provide the void here so that we can easily understand the particular method is not going to return anything here. So what is the name of this particular method? So carefully observe the naming convention, very important here. Whenever the particular method is starting, the first letter of this particular method, it should be small. It should be small letter so that the set, what we can do. So I want to set the dimension of this particular box here. So dimension is nothing but I want to set the three variables here. So that set values. So I want to check with to set values here. Getting the point. I am trying to create a one method. The particular method is not returning anything. So I'm making a void here. Getting the point. And later the name of the method I'm making set values here, and which is going to take three parameters here. So what are the three parameters which is going to take? Something called all the data type I'm trying to provide as a double only. Because so in the instance variable, we defined as a double data type. So to understand same thing, what I'm doing is I'm going to work with the three parameters I'm posing. The all three parameters are going to take as a double data type here. All three parameters are going to take as a double parameters here. Now understand here. So whenever we are trying to pass this particular three parameters values, so what I'm doing is whatever the values we are going to get, the three values I'm assigning into class level variables. Why I'm trying to assign into the class level variables? Because of this particular scope. Carefully observe here, because of this particular scope, what happens internally? So these variables are applicable into within this particular scope only. If we are trying to access this particular value, we are unable to access here. So we are going to get an error, basically the WHD. So we cannot access outside this particular block. So we are going to get compile time error. So because of this, what I want to do, whatever the value we are going to get it from this particular three variables, the three variables information I want to set it into this particular class level variables here. So those variables we are going to call as a instance variable. So carefully observe, this section we are going to call as a instance variable, and this section we are going to call as a local variable. Getting the point. Now after getting the value from the local to instance here, so how we are trying to assign here? So using this particular instance variable, I'm trying to assign in the value which is coming from the local. So height is equals to h and depth is equals to d. So these are the three variables here. These are the three variables here. Getting the point. So this section is very important here. Now whatever the local values we are getting here, we are initializing into the instance variable here. So how we are identifying whether we are initializing or not? So this particular single equal statement, what is doing here? Which is trying to initializing the value. So whatever the left side variable having the value, so which is going to initialize, the right side variable value, which is going to initializing into this particular left variable here. So this is also very important here. Basically, whenever we are calling this particular set values method, what we are going to do? We are going to pass this particular parameters here. Right. The values method which is expecting three parameters. Whenever we are trying to pass this particular variable's value, what happens internally? The values are coming with this particular W, H, and D. Whenever we are going to get this particular W, H, D, so now what we are doing is, again, we are reassigning into one more variable. So one more variable is nothing but the width, height, and depth here. So to access outside of this particular method, getting the point. To access this particular outside this particular method here, what I'm doing here, whatever the value we are getting, so those values I'm trying to initializing into instance variables here. So this section is important here. Now, after initializing this section, what we are doing is, whenever we are going to call here, we are able to access this particular variable information here. We are able to access this particular variable information here. So now I'm going to run the same example here. So I'm going to run, okay. So let me comment the entire section, whatever we discussed as of now. The previous example, whatever we discussed, I'm trying to make everything as a comment here. Okay, back to here, I want to create a one object here. So I'm trying to create object here because in the previous example, we already identified to create an object here, what are the steps we need to follow here. So if you observe carefully, so what we are going to do, basically in the previous example, we are having the scope to access the variables here. Getting the point. So with the object reference here, what we are doing is, we are able to access this particular variable and we are trying to initializing the value. Getting the point. Now, what I am doing, directly instead of accessing this particular variable, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to call this particular method here. So I'm going to call this particular method. So what is the name of this particular method we are having? Something called SetValue. So this particular SetValue, which is expecting three parameters here. So something 12.0, so another one 45.0 and 78.0, because so this particular SetValue method, which is expecting double data type values, After calling this particular SetValues method, what we can do, I want to print this particular method here. The value method I want to print. So box dot value method. So this is very important here. Now you can understand here. I'm trying to run in the debug mode. I'm trying to run the same example in the debug mode, so that we are going to have, so how exactly the variables are changing internally. We are going to understand here. Getting the point. Now we can see we are calling this particular. Now we can see we are trying to call this particular variable section. Okay, now the variables also we are having the left side section. You can see. So W, how much we are having? 12. Whatever this particular height we are having 45. Whatever this particular depth we are having 78. Getting the point. So this section is important here. So whenever we are trying to assign into this particular W value into this particular width, so you can see the width as of now we are having 0. How we are getting this particular 0? Whenever we are trying to call the particular default constructor, the default values are going to assign here. Getting the point. The default values are we are going to get for this particular each and every variable here. Okay, now we can see. So inside this keyboard, if I'm going to click on F6 here, so now you can observe here. So what is happening internally? Whatever the W variable we are having, something called 12 here, the value, what we are doing is, we are trying to assign into this particular width variable here. Same way you can understand here, the second one, the height also which is changing here. Something called 45, and later the particular depth. So the particular depth also which is changing as a 78. So whenever we are trying to initializing into the local variable value into this particular instance variable, so what are the advantages we are going to get? Here? Getting the point. The basic advantages here, so using this particular variable, we can perform any other operations here. Right. So after completion of this particular block of code also, we can perform any operations using this particular 3 variables here. So how we are going to perform these 3 variables operations here? Because, so what we did in the previous example, whenever we are trying to create an object here, getting the point, whenever we are trying to create an object internally, what happens internally? So the objects are going to store in the heap memory location. Right. The objects are going to store in the heap memory location with a reference called box here. So this section is important here. So because of this particular heap memory, what happening internally? the values are going to change here, right? The changed values also available inside this particular heap memory. So because of this particular heap memory, you can do any other operations using this particular reference here. Using this particular reference here, you can perform any other operations also after executing this particular block of code. After executing this particular block of code here. So this section is going to give more information here, right? Now, so you're understanding, right, how exactly the values are changing internally, and after executing this particular block of code, how we are going to access here. So if I'm going to call this particular value method, now you can see inside this particular this, we are able to having the value information. We are able to see the values of each variable here. So because of this, now we can see previously we are into this particular set value method. So we set the values. Now we are into the value method. Now what we are doing here with this particular instance variables value. With the instance variables value, what we are doing here, we are trying to do some multiplication. Here. The multiplied value we are assigning into this particular wall. So this is the final result we are going to get, and the final result we are trying to return into this particular value method. So here we are going to get here now something called the 42120. So this is the way we can work with the particular set values method and value method. So any questions regarding this particular value method? Okay. So what is the purpose of this particular values method here? What we are doing is to set the values. We are going to work with this particular method. So one more important example I want to share here. So basically, here I want to provide private access modifier. Here. So carefully observe here. Whenever we are trying to provide this particular variables as a private, so we don't have a scope to access like this here. So in the previous example, we identified this particular section here, right? And now we can observe if I'm going to access here, so we are getting an error here. So previously we are able to access the successful, like we can initialize the values of the each variables here. But now what happening internally? We are getting a compile time error here. Now you can see. So what is the error is indicating here? The field. What is the field we are having? Box.width. So box.width is not visible here. So carefully observe here. So whenever we are making this particular variable, so we don't have a scope to provide the values of directly. But now you can see, even though this particular variable having the private access modifier here, so still we are able to change the values here. Change the values is nothing but we are able to assign the values here. So getting the points. So this particular concept we are going to call as a encapsulations here. One of the OOPS principle we are trying to discussing here. So the one of the OOPS principle is nothing but encapsulations here. So what exactly the particular encapsulation is doing here? Getting the point. So now you can understand here what exactly the particular encapsulation is doing here. Basically, what we are doing here, we are trying to convert into the, like we are trying to wrapping into the single unit of work here. So basically, what exactly we are doing here? Now you can observe. So whatever the variables we are having and whatever the methods we are having, so we are trying to convert it into the single unit of object here. So what is the object we are having? Something called box here. Getting the point. So now whenever we are trying to convert into this particular object style here, internally, what happening internally? So we are trying to hide this particular data here. Getting the point. So whatever the data we are having for this particular three variables here, so we are trying to hide for the outside of this particular class here. Getting the point. So if you observe carefully, we are unable to access this particular variable information here. Now what we are doing here, we are trying to hiding this particular variable information from the outside class. But now we are having the scope here. So we are able to access within the same class here. So within the same class, we are able to access and we are able to change the information. But whenever we are trying to access from the outside, so we are going to get a compilation error here. So this section we are going to call as a encapsulations here. So encapsulations here, what we are doing here. So technically in the encapsulations, the variables, getting the point, the variables of this particular class, which is going to hidden by the outside of this particular other classes here, outside of this particular class. Right. So this particular variables are going to hidden by the outside this particular class. So this is the way we are going to achieve the encapsulations here. Right. So we'll have a more information on this particular encapsulations in the upcoming classes here. But simple understand we need to know whenever we are trying to make this particular variable. So how we are going to access and how we are going to initializing the value using this particular method here. So now we need to understand here. So how exactly the method is working internally. So we need to understand the behavior of this particular method here, and we need to understand the advantages also. Basically the behavior here, so whatever the value we are going to get, so which is trying to initializing into local variable into instance variables here, right? The advantages here, when we are having this particular private variable, so directly we are not able to access the variables here, but using this particular method we can change the value. Using this particular method, we can change the value. So these are the very important section we are going to get from the method concepts here. Right. Now, I'm trying to move another important section called constructors here. So because we identify the purpose of this particular method and we identify the benefits of this particular method here. And later, so how exactly the constructors are going to work here. So to understand this particular constructors here, we identified here while creating this particular object here. So we are having the default constructors here. So before going to discuss this particular default constructors here, first what we need to do, basically, so it's going to initialize the variables of this particular each class here. Right. Now, whenever we are trying to call this particular method here, what we are doing internally, so we are trying to initializing the value. We are trying to initializing the value. Now we can observe how many times we are going to call. If the value is changed here, what happens internally? Basically, using this particular setter method also, we are trying to initializing the value. Right. So Java is going to provide the automatic initialization concept here. So automatic initialization concept. So the automatic initialization concept we are going to get it from the constructors. Getting the point. So whenever we are trying to initialize this particular object through this particular method, what we are doing is we need to call. So to call this particular method, first we need an object here. Getting the point. So first we need a object here. After creating an object, we are going to call this particular method, and later we are going to provide the values here. Later we are going to provide the values. So based on this particular values, the values are going to initialize here. But come back to the constructor here. So constructor by default, which is going to provide the automatic values here. But when this is going to provide the automatic values here, whenever, getting the point. So whenever we are trying to call the particular constructor here, the constructors are going to call while creating an object of the particular appropriate class here. So the constructors are going to call whenever we are trying to create object of the specified object, specified class here. Right. So these are the things we need to understand here. Okay. So to create this particular constructor, what we need to do here? So to create this particular constructor, we need to follow some syntaxes here. The constructor should be the class name. Getting the point. The constructor should be the class name, and the constructor not going to return any value. Even void also, which is not going to return here. Getting the point. And basically, the constructors are going to return the current class object here. So internally, those are going to return here, but explicitly, we are not going to return any information from the constructor here. Getting the point. So we need to specify if we are working with the constructors here, so if you are interested to specify the parameters, so we can work on the parameters here. Right. Now I'm trying to work with the default constructors. I'm trying to work with the default constructor. So now you can see the name of the constructor is matching with the class name, and you can observe that this is the constructor of this particular box class. But here, this constructor is not returning anything here. Right, this particular constructor which is not returning anything here. But what is the purpose of this particular constructor here? Now understand here. So in the current example, in this particular current example, I want to specify the values here. Right. I want to specify the values here. So now you can see the depth value I want to provide as a. So these are the default values we are going to get. Getting the point. So these are the default values we are going to get whenever we are trying to call this particular constructor here. So simple understand here. Let me run the same example. So in the debug mode, now you can observe. So you can see. So we are calling this particular method here. But before sticking with the method here, now we need to understand here because the constructor already executed. After executing this particular constructor only, the object is created here. So this is very important here. So before executing this particular constructor, we are not going to get anything here. But make sure we need to understand what are the values of that particular width, height, and depth here. Now you can see how we are getting this particular -1, -2, -3. So how we are getting this particular -1 and -2, -3? So because while executing this particular constructor, getting the point, while executing this particular constructor, what are the values we specified here? These are the default values I'm specifying here. Getting the point. So these are the default values I'm specifying here. The default values are executed here. And later, whenever we are trying to call this particular method here, whenever we are trying to call this particular method here, what is happening internally? The default values are going to override here. So now you can see the -1 is override with 12. Same way, the -2 is override with 45. And same way, the -3 is going to override with 78 here. So this is the way we can override the values and we can get it from the default values whenever we are trying to call the particular constructor here. So now we identified here to get it from the default values what we can do. Right. So these are about the default constructors here. These are about the default constructor, and later what we are doing is we are calling the the particular SetValues method, and later we are calling the value method which is going to return the value. Right. Now, so if you are understanding here what exactly the constructors are going to call. So you can see, so this particular section we already discussed here. So this section we are going to call as the default constructor here. By default, if you are not specifying any constructor here, what happens here? So compiler is going to provide the default constructor here. If we don't have anything, the compiler is going to provide the default. But whenever we are trying to specify the parameters constructors here, getting the point. So whenever we are trying to provide the parameters constructors here, what happens internally? So the parameters constructors are going to execute here. So at this time, the Java compiler will not provide any default constructors. Whenever you are trying to provide any constructor, the default constructor is not going to provide it. Right. Now we identify the default constructor behavior. Same way, now what I'm going to do? I'm going to work with parameterized constructors here. Getting the point. So how we identify the particular parameterized method here? How we identify the particular parameterized method? Same way we are going to work with parameterized constructors here. Same way we are going to work with the parameterized constructors here. Right. Now we need to understand here how we can define this particular parameterized constructor. So even though if we are trying to work with the parameterized constructors, what we need to follow here? So we need to follow the same syntaxes to create a constructor here. So what are the syntaxes we need to follow? The constructor name should be the class name here. So what is the name of our class? Something called box here. And so already I explained here, which is not going to return any value here. Right. Now observe double w is equals to, so I'm trying to work with a parameterized constructor. I'm trying to work with a parameterized constructor here. So this section we are going to provide, this section is going to provide the parameterized constructor here. And observe here, so width is equals to w and height is equals to h and depth is equals to d. So these are the three variables we are going to work here. So whenever we are trying to work with this particular, the parameterized constructor here, what we can do, so how we can call this particular parameterized constructor. So and what are the ways to we can call this particular parameterized constructor. Now you can see we are calling the default constructor. So instead of calling this particular default constructor, what I am going to do, I am going to copy the same information to this particular constructor of this particular class called box here. So now you can see while creating this particular object here, we are passing the information here. Right. Now you can observe when I'm trying to run this particular example. Whenever I'm trying to run this example here, now you can see we are getting the particular values here. So we need to understand here how exactly the constructors are going to call here. So carefully observe, if I'm going to run the same example inside this particular debug, now we can observe, now we are in the box class. Now we are in the box class parameterized constructor. So whenever we are having this particular three parameters, we are going to have parameterized constructors. Right. Even you can specify the one parameters or two parameters as many we require. We can specify this particular all the parameters here. So this section we are going to call as a parameterized constructor, and later we are going to provide the parameter values here. Now, so now what we can do here, simple. I'm trying to initializing this particular values. So width we assign and height we assign. The same way we are trying to assigning the depth value. So now we can see, so by default, so we are having the 12, 25 and we are going to get 78. So whenever we are calling this particular constructor, the values are initializing here. So whenever this particular values are initializing, so what happening internally? So again, so we can identify these values are going to store in the particular heap memory, and later we are calling this particular value method. So this particular value method is going to execute here, and the values are going to return here. So these are about the creating a parameterized constructor and calling the particular appropriate value method. Right. So now I want to create one more object here. So this is the way we can create as many objects we want to create here. So what we can do, simply we need to specify the particular parameters in the particular class, then only we can work like. So if I'm going to specify here, we are getting an error here. So why I am getting this particular error here? Because this particular constructor does not have single parameterized constructor. So we are having three parameterized constructors, right? So as of now, we don't have the single parameterized constructor. So we'll try to check with you in our upcoming classes here how we can define the single parameterized constructor. But now we can observe. So we want to check with so different parameters. And we want to change the reference here. So So whenever we are trying to change this particular reference here, box 2. So now how many objects I'm creating here? 2 objects I'm creating here. So we'll observe how exactly the 2 constructors are going to call. How exactly the 2 constructors are going to call. So this is this is very important here. Basically, how many objects we are going to create. So all the objects are going to have unique information here. So this section we need to understand that all the objects are going to have unique information here. So let's understand here what are the unique information we are going to have here. So something. So now you can see the particular box constructor is trying to execute here with the reference called box here. Now we identified the value width 12, 45 and 78. So again we identified we are trying to initializing into this particular depth here. So this is a different object. So this is the different object here. Okay, sorry. I want to provide with a different let me run the same example here. So now you can check here whenever we are trying to work with here. Okay, one object we are getting here. So this value we are going to get. Now you can observe we are having 2 references here. First one we are having box and second one we are having box 2. So you can see each box having unique information. Each box having unique information here. So carefully observe the first box having 78, 45, 12 and the second box we are having 98, 65, 14. So now what you are understanding here? So using the object creation we are going to get a unique information here. So which is not the same to the another object here. So this section we need to understand little bit carefully how many objects we are going to create. All the objects are having unique information here. Okay. So any questions regarding this particular parameterized constructor? Any question you are having this particular parameterized constructor? Okay. So if we don't have anything, what I'm going to do, so we are going to check with this keyword. Getting the point. So what exactly this keyword is going to work here. So this section is very important here. Getting the point. So how exactly this particular keyword is going to work. So basically what happens internally, sometimes the particular method, sometimes what happens internally, the particular method is not going to return. Getting the point. So it's not going to refer to the object information here, right? So to allow, so this keyword we can use here. Getting the point. Whenever we are trying to call any method, sometimes what happens here, so the particular method is not going to point to the current object information here. Getting the point. To access this particular method, what we need here, so we need this keyword here. Basically, so let me check someone having the issue here. So yesterday I provided I did not get any email IDs here because I'm trying. Yesterday I told I uploaded the videos into the my channel, and I'm going to give you the access to work on the previous recordings here because I did not get any email IDs here. So I'm not expecting here. Can you please provide the email IDs in the WhatsApp group so that if I'm going to close this particular meeting, so whatever the email IDs you are going to provide, all the email IDs will go on.
So there is no access to, so there is only access to type only admin.
Achha, okay. You don't have an option to provide the video. Okay.
Yes.
So sorry, I don't know. Okay, so for this, okay. Okay, for this, I will provide the access. I hope, let me check if I'm having the option to provide. So we are having, okay. Okay, I will give an option to like provide you. So you can, we'll send you the personal number. Or, so basically, you're not getting my number in the group. Maybe you're going to get. So my number. So every day I'm trying to share the link. Every day I'm trying to share the particular like meeting link here. So use the same number to provide your email IDs. So is it fine? So can you check? So anyone having an issue like you are able to provide the email ID or not? Because today also I provided the link here. Join the session like. Yes. Okay. So can anyone message me so that we can get to know like you are able to provide the message to me. Okay. Thank you. I received here. Now I'm requesting all of you, please share your email IDs so that I'm going to provide the record session link here. Okay. So back to here. So now we want to discuss this keyword here. So what exactly this keyword contains here? Right. So what is the purpose of this keyword here? Now you need to understand here. Basically, every time whenever we are trying to work with this keyword here, which is going to return the current class object here. Getting the point? So which is going to return the current class object here. So what is the current class object here? Now, whenever if you're trying to perform anything, so you are in the which class here, the current class object is going to provide here. The simple understanding here, now we are in the box class here. Now we are in the box class here. So this particular box class related information which is going to provide here. So who is going to provide here? The particular, this keyword is going to provide the current class object information here. Right, getting the point. To use this particular keyword, what are the syntax we need to follow here? Now first one, so first two, we need to call this keyword here in the particular variable section here. So carefully observe the simple example I want to share here in the box demo. Let me comment this. Observe here also I want to make width and here also sorry and now you can see. So whenever we are having local variable and instance variable. So carefully observe whenever we are having local variable and instance variable. So what are the drawbacks we are going to get? So this section is very important yet. So now I'm going to call this particular SetValues method. So we'll observe whenever we are trying to call this particular SetValues method. So what happening internally? Getting the point. So let me enable here. So let me enable the particular method section. Now I want to call the particular values method. So after this, we are calling the constructors. Now we are calling the values method. Now you can see what happening internally. So we need to initially, whenever we are calling this particular set values method, what happening internally? So whatever the value we are going to get this particular width variable, we are trying to assign into the class level variable, something called the instance variables width, height and depth here. So now you can see inside this particular depth here. So what are the values we are having? So this example is not going to provide more. let me work on this particular box as a default constructor, so that we are going to have more understanding here. Again, I'm trying to run the same example here. So you can see default constructor we are calling, and the second box we are calling. Now I'm calling with the box one object reference set value method I'm calling. So you need to understand here. So previously we identified here. So these are the default values we are going to get. So these are the default values we are going to get. But whenever I'm trying to call this particular set value method, what happening internally? So whatever the value we are going to have inside this particular bed, so this value we are assigning into instance variable called, so this particular width here. But now you can observe, so whenever we are having the same names, what are the same names here? The local variable name and the instance variable name. So we already identified the left variable we are going to call as a instance variable, the right variable we are going to call as a local variable. So how we are differentiating here? Because these three are coming as a the method parameters, and these three are coming as a these three are the left side variables are coming from the class level variables. Right. Now observe, if I'm going to click on F6 here, if I'm trying to move the next line, so we are not changing the value. Now we can see the values are not changing into the particular instance variables here. Getting the point? So the values are not changing into this particular instance variables here. So why it is not changing here? Why it is not changing here? Previously it was affected here. So how it is affected here? Whenever the local variable name does not have the same with the instance variable here. Whenever we are not like both the local and instance variable not having the same name, so they successfully update the previous value. So it's going to update the whatever the value we are going to pass from the particular method here. But now the values are not updating here. Now the values are not updating here. After executing this particular set values method, now you can see still we are able to access the -1, -2, -3. Getting the point? If I'm going to back to this particular box, if I'm coming back to here, now you can see what are the values we are having? Still -1, -2, -3. But here, if you observe, whenever we are calling this particular set values method, we are trying to pass the values here. What are the values we are passing? Something called 12, 45 and 78 here. But now you can see the 12, 78, 45 we are not getting here. So why we are not getting here? Getting the point? So what happening internally? Whenever we are having the local and instance name, local and instance same name here. Getting the point? So what is happening here? So this section is very important here. The compiler is going to treat it as a this particular both the variables. Both the variables like the 6 variables here is going to treat it as a local variables only. So it's not going to treat it as a instance variable with the local variable behavior. So all the variables the compiler is going to treat it as a local variable. So how we can provide because we want to provide the differentiate, right? So which one is a local and which one is a instance here? Getting the point? So if I'm going to run this particular example here, so what happens internally? We are going to get the value called -6 here. But we expected different output here. We expected different output here. So how we can work on this particular problem? How we can resolve this particular problem here? Getting the point? So to resolve this particular problem here, what we need to do here? Simply we need to work with this keyword here. We need to work with this keyword here. So carefully observe here. So what is happening internally? So to understand carefully what we are doing here, so as I explained here, so wherever we are trying to use this particular keyword called this, so which is going to return the current class object here, right? So along with the current class object here, now what you are understanding is whenever we are having the local and instance variable name, so how we are going to differentiating it using this particular this. So this we already identified here, current class object. Inside this particular current class object, we are trying to refer the instance variable here. And the right side section, so we are having the local variable here. The right side section we are having local variable. Same way you can check with the height and height here. Getting the point. So now if I'm going to run the same example, so carefully observe, if I'm going to run the same example using this particular debug behavior, now I'm calling the value the SetValues method. So again I'm trying to open this particular variable section. So observe carefully, whenever I'm trying to open this particular variable section, so now you can see values is changing or not. The particular value is changing or not. Now you can see the height, the final one, depth here. So this is the way we can change the values here. Now this is the way we can differentiate the local variable and the particular instance variables here. So now you can see the values are changed here. Now we are able to see the affected values here. Now we are able to see the particular affected values here. So now if I'm going to click on this particular F6 here, so we are getting an expected output here. So the expected volume output we are getting here. So this section is very important here. Cutting the point. So this keyword is going to give more information here. Along with this particular differentiating this particular method here, if we want to call, cutting the point, if we want to call any method, so if we want to call any method which is defined inside this particular same class, cutting the point. So the simple understanding here, I want to call the square here. This dot square here. So now you can see using this keyword, we are able to call, like we are getting the square method or not. And along with square method, we are able to get the SetValues method. Now what you are understanding here? So along with the current class object, we can call method also. So now we need to understand here how we can call. I want to call width, and same way I want to call something called height. So you can see basically the space we are having int data type, but now what we are passing here, the double data type values here. Getting the point. So because of this what happening internally, so we are getting a compilation error. So let me change here. Okay, we can change here. So now we can see, so cannot cast here, because again which is expecting double here. Getting the point. Now what you are understanding here, using this keyword, we are able to call the particular method also. So now again I'm going to call the same example here. So how exactly the particular method is calling, we need to understand here. So see, values method we are calling. We are trying to work with all the variable section. Now I'm moving into get value method. Now we can see, so now we are in the value method. So internally what is doing here, which is calling square method. Now we can see, now we are in the square method. Getting the point. Now we are in the square method. So after completion of this particular square method, now what I'm going to do, again we are going back to the value method internally, so which is going to return the multiplication values here. Right. So this is all about the very important section we are discussing regarding this keyword. So anyone having any questions regarding this keyword? Okay. No. So if you don't have anything here, so we are going to have one important method here, something called finalize method. So we'll try to check with the finalize method what exactly is going to work here. Basically, whenever we are trying to create this particular object here, so where these particular objects are storing here, so these particular objects are going to store in a memory called heap memory, right? So now we are creating an object, we are doing whatever the operation we want to here. Whatever the operation P1. But after doing this particular operations here, so what happening the particular objects here? Getting the point. So what are the after performing our operations here, so where it will go these objects? Getting the point. Where this particular object, where it will go. Now we need to understand here the objects are going to collected by the our garbage collection. Getting the point. So here we are going to have one important section, something called garbage collection, and in Java by default the garbage collection is enabled. So if we are the objects are not used here, so whatever the object we are not using, so those objects are going to collected by the garbage collection here, right? So this is a way we can reduce the heap memory here. We can reduce the particular heap memory here. So instead of after using also, if the object is still available in the particular heap memory, so what happens internally? So our heap memory is going to increase. Our heap memory is going to increase here, right? So to reduce here the particular heap memory, what we are going to do? So we're having one important concept called garbage collection. The garbage collection is going to collect the unwanted object here, right? So it is going to collect the unwanted object and it's going to reduce the heap memory size, which is going to reduce the heap memory size, right? So these are about the simple important things we identified. So in the tomorrow we are going to check with more information regarding this particular. We'll try to check with a simple example on the stack, and after completion of this particular stack example, so we'll try to check with overloading methods here. So polymorphism related concepts we are going to discuss here. So first we are going to check with a simple example on this particular stack. So by defining, declaring this particular methods and constructors here. After completion of this particular example, we are going to work on the polymorphism related concepts here. Getting the point. So if you don't have anything, so we can conclude the today class, and I am going to provide the videos access here, right? So you can access the videos and try to practice the previous classes what we discussed here. Okay, anything you want to discuss regarding this particular today class? Okay. So thanks for attending the session. We'll continue tomorrow. Okay. Can you please message whoever need this particular record session videos, so that I can provide the access of this particular record session videos.